grow grass without rain, isn't it?
I know, I haven't figured out that yet. So I think initially, Dr. Bidwell and I were gonna split, but he's not. He claims he's got a jury duty or some kind of court-appointed thing, something going on there, so you guys get to listen to me today, and so what I'm gonna talk about, I think we were supposed to address some hay management, that kind of bleeds over into grazing. A lot of that assumes that we're gonna have some moisture available to grow any kind of pasture or forage this year, and so basically, kind of my take-home message today, I mean, I think regardless of whether or not we're talking about grazing or hay management, the most important thing that we need to consider is at some point we've got to maintain a critical stubble height, okay? And so when you think about a stubble height, what does that mean? How high is high enough, or how short's too short?
Well, you got cows, of course.
If you can see the cow pies out there, I can guarantee it's too short, okay? And so that's kind of where we're gonna head today. Kind of a couple things that I'll forget if I don't say them right now that kind of popped up on some of Gary's maps that he was showing there. It looks to me like that we always tend to get in a hay bind at some point during the summer. Looks like southeast Louisiana and Mississippi may be our best bet if we go southeast. They produced some hay down in there last year. I'm not sure exactly what we're gonna do this summer, but I think I know. Now, some way that doesn't look focused to me. Some way that does. And so when we talk about the sequence of events, you know, eventually this has all got to get down to stocking rate at some point. So even during normal years, whatever those normal years are, we have variation in forage production, and the amount of forage that we produce is different. Stocking rates get adjusted up and down even during the normal years. And then so what happens when we talk about perennial grass pastures, whether or not we're talking about native grass pastures or whether we're talking about introduced grass pastures, they're going to be less productive during a drought, okay? Now, I used to have the wrong terminology up here, but I adjusted these to have the correct drought terminology. So when we talk about these extreme or exceptional droughts like we've had last summer and the summer before, usually what we're seeing in a lot of cases is our forage yield reduction is only about 10% of normal, or it's reduced by about 90%. Even during those moderate to severe droughts that we usually don't think about, but we can manage around, what we'll see during those years is a yield reduction of about half, okay? And so this is a lot of times our norm, okay? Now the thing that struck me about that wet period that we've had the last 20 or 25 years, it wasn't above average, it was the wettest ever, okay? It was also pretty warm. And so what we saw at that time was a lot of production from a lot of our summer pastures, okay? That was the thing I took out of that. Also learned quite a bit out here on the bench this morning before we started, so I've learned an awful lot of stuff today already, okay? I'm gonna be on overload after lunch. And so, because our yields are gonna be reduced due to drought, we're gonna have to reduce those stocking rates by an appropriate amount, 50 to 90%. Okay? Has that happened yet? In some cases it has. You know, you guys are maybe more accustomed to dealing with drought or just normal precipitation's drought to a lot of guys, you know, for you out here. So y'all are a little more in tune to adjusting a lot of the stocking rates. Some of the guys in the other part of Oklahoma are not, okay? They're still trying to muddle along, and their stocking rates just kind of being reduced by attrition, if you will. And so, kind of the take-home message today is that once normal precipitation patterns return, the negative effects that we've seen from this drought, they're not going to immediately disappear. okay? How long is it going to take these pastures that are drought damaged to recover? 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4, 5? May have to replant some, we don't really know, okay? Worst case is they have to go in and try to reestablish those pastures, okay? So when, in Forage 101 kinda, if you will, Aaron, you may have been asleep this day in there, but, when we talk about what forages are tolerant of drought, okay? Most of our introduced adaptive forages that we use are adapted to drought, okay? Or drought conditions or low moisture conditions, okay? A lot of our introduced adaptive forages are also tolerant of high heat, okay? Drought by itself, high heat by itself, what they're not tolerant of is both, like we had 2 summers ago. I'm convinced that it wasn't as much the drought 2 summers ago as it was the high heat that caused a lot of those pastures to thin, okay? At that point, what did we notice? A lot of grassy weeds, a lot of broadleaf weeds kind of moving into some of those thin areas, okay? Most of our introduced adapted forages are not tolerant of low fertility, they're not tolerant of overgrazing, and by overgrazing, that would also include a lot of that short residue following hay harvest, okay? They've got to have some help, and by help, that's going to be that critical stubble height. And that critical stubble height is going to be extremely important during this drought for a couple reasons that we'll talk about a little bit later, okay? So when we talk about the concepts of managing grasslands, and this thing will go blank before I get through this, because I've put this figure together over several years. And so what we've got here is basically we've got along the bottom just about every potential kind of grassland that we have in Oklahoma. Native rangelands, degraded rangelands, those that are stored or restored. Down on the other end, we've got complex introduced mixtures, simple introduced mixtures, and introduced monocultures, okay? Right in this area, with this restored grasslands, these might either be native plant species or they may be introduced species or mixtures, kind of depending on what kind of programs were available when they were established, okay? Now, along the line of these native rangelands, degraded rangelands, and some of the restored grasslands, our typical management practices only consist of 2 things: prescribed fire and grazing management. During a drought, which one's eliminated? Fire's eliminated because a lot of the production is reduced. It's probably more valuable for use as livestock feed. So that only leaves one management practice to manage our rangelands. That's grazing management, primarily decreased stocking rate. On the other end over here, with a lot of these introduced, we've got fertilization, we've got the application of herbicides, and then I include fencing in there because typically what happens is we reduce the pasture size so we can more efficiently utilize that forage that we produce by dumping more fertilizer on, okay? And so what we're doing over here, the reason that we have these technological processes, because if we have a Bermuda grass pasture, an old world blue stem pasture as an example, if we're not managing these with a lot of these agronomic processes, what those pastures are trying to do, they're trying to run back over here and be native rangeland, okay? And how long does that take? If we pull up a chair and sit there and watch it go, how long is it gonna take?
You'll be half the shade.
Yeah, we'll be through a couple of those wet, dry cycles on that, 3,000 year, 3,500 or something like that, whatever it is. It takes a long time, okay? So basically what we're doing, or we're trying to maintain these in something that it doesn't want to be, okay? So when these pastures are overgrazed, when they're repeatedly harvested for hay, short stubble height, they thin, what kind of plants do we see run in there? Annual broomweed, annual 3-on, that's a normal process, okay? And so what we're doing is we're trying to keep it out of here. Those are actually native plants, okay? And so those are the first things that pop up and they're trying to head back over here to this thing, okay? So we're managing them to be something that they don't wanna be, okay? So on our native end over here, these ecological processes are more important. Typically, we're not gonna do a lot of prescribed fire over on something that's introduced. What we're also not going to do is typically do a lot of fertilization, herbicide application out here on some of these native areas, okay? So, we really don't have a lot of management practices available for use. Fire, grazing management for the natives, got fertilization, herbicide application, and then fencing or grazing management for the introduced. So we're not really limited, but it's not real fancy to manage a bunch of forage, okay? So what makes it successful? Well, you get on this, introduced forages, we typically favor to manage one species out of these other things. The differences are the amount of inputs that we apply, okay, to maintain our monocultures over in the introduced. And then what makes all this work is precipitation. Okay, that's what makes fertilizer work, that's what makes the herbicide application work. Other important pieces of the puzzle are the plant response to grazing or defoliation, which we'll talk about a little bit, and then grazing management practices. Okay, and then so what order, this is the normal precipitation order. Where we are now, this is flip-flopped. Okay, so our grazing management and harvest management is now gonna be a lot more important than the application, especially on the introduced and fertilization, herbicide application, because it's so dependent on precipitation to work. Okay, y'all follow that line of thinking? I know that's kind of convoluted, but, you know, it's, you sit there and wonder, and it gets to be kind of, it's simple because it depends on precipitation. What makes it difficult, if it doesn't rain, it doesn't work, so then you get the question, okay, what's gonna produce during a drought? Oh boy, you know, I wish I knew the answer to that. Prickly pear cactus does pretty well. Saw a nice picture of some Scotch thistle this morning. You know, it did pretty well. Both those are pretty useless for what we're trying to do, okay? So the plants that respond well to the drought are really not what we have a lot of use for a lot of times, okay? And so if they're increasing in production, what's disappearing is the plants that we have a preference for. And so then the questions for the day, these were my questions a couple weeks ago when I was putting this together. There's a whole lot of questions. You know, how's harvest management managed for hay crops? Is it the same for grazed forages? Yes and no is the answer. Okay, what are the pastures gonna do this summer? Gary's already said he didn't know what precipitation was gonna do, so what do we have to go on? We have to go on what it's doing right now, what soil moisture right now. Topsoil okay, subsoil?
No.
Not any. How long we had topsoil moisture? Couple, 3 weeks is about all, okay? Any of you guys watched my little sun up bad news thing here about 2 or 3 weeks ago? What I said on sun up was, and this was more or less the beginning of February. So right now that our soil moisture was in the same situation that it was back in 11, where we didn't have any in the spring, okay? All our forage production, especially during the summer, is going to depend on precipitation and soil moisture that we get during the spring. Because one of the things Dr. Bidwell will tell you if he was here is that by July 1st, 75% of the forage production is going to have occurred, whether or not we're talking about introduced forages or native forages. So if it doesn't happen by July 1st, when is it gonna happen? You got a chance next year. Okay? So when we talk about drought or you know, the drought ending, the past 2 summers have been so horrible that a lot of our pastures are not going to recover this year you know, if it rains 40 days and 40 nights, so to speak. You know, a lot of our pastures still have a long way to go, okay? So are we gonna have early green spring up like we did last year? Marty made me come down there to his neck of the woods last spring, and I think I remember I was at your place, was the last day of the winter, and Bermuda grass pastures had already greened up and guys were already grazing. And I said, well, this is too early because technically tomorrow's the first day of spring. Are they gonna green up early this year? I think they may. I don't know if it will be quite as early as last year, but I think we're gonna have an early spring green up. What's that gonna mean for these pastures? You know, it's gonna be bad news again, I'm afraid. You did notice this last year that even though they greened up early, one of the things that happened was that they didn't really have a lot of early growth, even though they greened up, primarily because carbohydrate reserves were reduced. Fertility was I call it incorrect fertility, but it's kind of hard to say that when there's not enough precipitation to make it work anyway. Okay, so you're kind of, if it doesn't rain, you know, I mean, you can fertilize all you want to, you're not gonna improve a lot. But one of the things that we talked about last year that actually did occur was that dadgum weed encroachment. Man, it was pretty tough last year. We had a lot of increased weed pressure, a lot of competition from some early weed growth. We're gonna see that same thing again occurring this year as well, okay?
Daren?
Yes, sir.
We got the broomweed problem that everybody else has got. I've had several guys already call. They're wanting to spray for those. Their question is, do we need to brush hog down that old residue, or can we get enough spray through that to take care of that? My thinking on it was that wouldn't stop enough of that spray to justify the cost
Of mowing and spraying?
Of shredding.
Yeah, I think that's probably right, because if you just look at the economics of that mowing is expensive anyway. I don't think that would be
My opinion is Darren, they use more water.
increase the volume. Yeah, I think that would certainly be, I'm like you, I don't think that mowing that down is gonna improve it a lot. If they're still concerned about it, then just increase that spray volume would probably be the quickest way to accomplish that. Because, I mean, the other thing about this drought, I mean, you get right down to it, you know, it's the cost of keeping a cow around the place. What's the most expensive part of that's feeding the thing, okay? Feeding her still what the most, it's 9 months now instead of 2, okay? So anything you can do to lessen those costs, and the weed control is an expensive deal,
Yeah.
okay? But one of the things that happen is that we see during a drought, they've got a little opportunist, and they're taking full advantage of that opportunity.
Can they really even justify the cost of spraying it with the pattern that we're in?
My question is there any native range worth spraying?
I don't think native range is worth spraying, because if I have to kill a little time, one of the things I'm gonna show you some stocking rate stuff, and when you talk about decreasing the stocking rate based on that precipitation, you're going from about a cow every 30 acres to one every 60, okay? And so you're talking about, if you can get it sprayed for $5 an acre, that's still $300 you got back in that one cow. Okay, maybe that helps answer your question a little bit more there. You can't put $300 more in a cow and feed it 9 months, spray broomweed. One of the things, the other thing to remember on that is, even during the drought, there's gonna be wet periods. Okay? And so I think maybe during when those wet periods are going to occur, they're gonna allow you to burn. The thing that you've gotta do is have it managed so that you've got enough residue there to carry a fire and get that cleaned up. And again, if you can see the cow pies out there, there's not enough residue out there to burn. Okay? So that residue kind of get to the meat here. And if you look at the relationship of forage growth or yield to energy reserves, you look at percent yield, and this is not tons per acre, this is just percent of total, whether it's a ton an acre, 10 tons an acre, whatever. I mean, you look at it, it's kind of slow to grow. You don't see your maximum yield occurring until out here about the boot stage or flower. Okay? So maximum dry matter yield occurs, you know, around the boot stage. Okay? So yield basically peaks about that time. If you think about forage quality, it's starting to decline pretty rapidly about then. Okay? So when we talk about harvesting, you know, what stage of growth to harvest to optimize yield and quality, it's always gonna be somewhere in this area. Okay? Now, if you look at the carbohydrate reserves, the percent carbohydrate reserves, it's over on the right-hand side. If you look at green up, you know, they're relatively high at green up. A lot of that's obviously going to depend on what happens the year before, okay? But even if they're down here to 20, they're still going to decline all the way through early vegetative growth, okay? So as these plants green up, once they get it's a lot of leaves, okay? So, you know, they've got probably 35 to 40% of their yield accumulated, and their energy reserves are at the absolute lowest. Okay? So if you come in and you graze at this point, or remove it, or harvest hay or whatever, you don't have any energy reserves to come back and initiate any more growth. Okay? So it's extremely critical when we talk about early green up to allow these carbohydrate reserves to be headed back up in a positive direction, okay? And they reach their maximum level at about the same time that we reach maximum yield, okay? Now what's confusing a lot of times is the quality. You just look at the quality standpoint, it's also going to be at its highest level out there when the carbohydrates are the lowest, okay? One of the other things I noticed heading down here, other than the horses on the wheat pasture, there wasn't a lot of hay supplies kind of scattered around anyway. I don't know that we saw one round bale anywhere between here and Stillwater. Okay? So, hay's in short supply, pasture's in short supply. You guys have kind of told me you think it's going to be an early spring green up, and I kind of agree with you. Okay, so what does that mean? Does that mean as soon as we get here in this early growth, what's gonna happen if those animals are placed out on pasture? They're gonna be extremely slow to come back, okay? So, it's important on this early growth not to begin growing, or not to begin grazing until these plants reach, you know, somewhere in, once the stems begin to elongate, okay? And then what happens if we graze them completely back down? Going to take the regrowth a little bit longer to occur, okay? And so this is just another way to look at it. If you remove 90% of the forage, you don't have any root growth occurring for about 3 weeks, okay? If you remove 70%, about half the roots stop growing for 3 weeks. If you remove 50% of it, you got less than 5% stop growing for 2 weeks. And then 30%, basically root growth is unaffected. Okay, so this is all stubble height, the residue height, the forage remaining. The range guys talk about take half, leave half. Okay? Take half, really not impacting root growth in it. Okay? So this plant stuff that goes on below ground, that it's not that we ignore it, we don't see it. How many of you guys have ever dug up a dadgum plant root just to see what it looks like? Nobody, you know. Why? You know, why would you do, you know, but there's a lot going on below the ground that's important. And especially during the drought, it's going to be more important. Because as we hopefully get some precipitation that moves through the profile, if you've got a little bitty old dinky root system up here in the top 6 inches and you've got moisture 2 or 3 feet below that, how are you going to get to it without roots? okay? So allowing these plants a chance to continue to have some form of growth, even during a drought, is gonna be extremely important. Not so much for the above ground as what's going on below ground. Okay, so we look at it above ground and we say, oh, you know, there's 2 inches, 3 inches, 4 inches, 2 feet, you know, then we can kind of guess, you know, the roots are doing pretty good. You know, how do you know that? Well, you know, you dig them up and see. You know, I know what they're doing. So, basically what's going on the top kind of mirrors what's going on a little bit below ground. So if we keep these plants short, well, the root system's gonna be deep and extensive. No, they're not. They're gonna be pretty short root systems. Okay? And so we talk a little bit about plant response to grazing, and I've got this separated into tall plants, semi-erect plants, short plants, or prostrate plants, but most of our natives tend to fall in that category, tall, upright plants. Those are not very grazing tolerant. The reason that they're not very grazing tolerant is because that growing point is elevated. Okay, and it's easy to remove. Once the growing point is removed, any new growth has to come from down along the plant crown at the base of the plant. Okay, and again, that's all related to those carbohydrate reserves. Now, our introduced grasses, there are some, you know, here we're talking about a lot of the summer annuals. Sudan grass, the sorghums, those types of things will be what would fall into this category. There's not very many of them. But these introduced grasses, they probably do best if they're grazed rotation. Okay? The natives, on the other hand, because we're typically having to deal with so many more acres per animal, they tend to be best managed, grazed continuously at a low stocking rate. Okay? Because we're not continually removing all those plants. And you can tell, and there's some good grazing managers out here in western Oklahoma, because we saw quite a bit of stubble on some native stuff on the way out. Okay? Anybody that has any kind of stubble left this time of year, pretty darn good grazing manager. Okay? These semi-erect plants, this old world blue stem is gonna be what I would consider a semi-erect plant. These types of plants typically do pretty well from a grazing standpoint, except during the periods of stress, and then they will start to thin out a little bit. A lot of our prostrate plants, Bermuda grass, buffalo grass, some of the grommas would be what I would consider these plants. These are pretty tolerant of close continuous grazing, okay? So then kind of back to what we talked about on that grassland management standpoint, if you predominantly have tall native plants and it's continuously overgrazed, what's gonna show up are these semi-erect and prostrate plants, okay? If you're predominantly semi-erect and they're overgrazed, then it's gonna become prostrate plants, okay? So you've got this kind of you can predict what's gonna go on based on some of the grazing management. Okay? Now this, can you guys read this on your, there's a lot of numbers on there, so I suspect they're probably a little bitty on your sheet. But these are recommended critical stubble heights. These are probably, I'd probably qualify this by saying under pretty good growing conditions. Okay? Move off down here, and there's not anything on here from have to ask Dr. Engel about what do y'all call critical grazing height on the natives? Like for tall or mid grass, you're probably talking about 6 to 10 inches.
Probably 6 to 10, although we usually think of it in terms of pounds per acre of residue.
Okay.
So it's gonna be about 50%.
Yeah. So the natives, they kind of approach from pounds of residue, somewhere, 6 to 10 inches on is there a lot of 6 to 10 inch stubble on the natives? No.
We didn't make it 2.
Maybe 2. Cow pies are bigger than the stubble. Well, I told you that wasn't good. So, I mean, but that's what we're dealing with during the drought. Okay, or those types of things. Pick on Bermuda grass here, you know, critical stubble height of, 2 to 3 inches. If you look at utilization, we're probably talking about 75% utilization, okay? In 2011, Bermuda grass didn't hardly get 3 inches tall the entire year, did it? What did it do last year? Get about twice that, maybe get 5 or 6? Didn't ever get that high last year? So what do you do about something like that? You graze it or don't graze it? Well, if you graze it, what's gonna happen? Then you gotta beat the weeds. I mean, you either don't graze it and there's not very many consequences, or you graze it because you're forced to, and then there's some other things that are gonna happen based on that. Okay? Not that anything's good or bad, that's just a situation we're working with. Ideally, being a plant guy, okay? Not a forage guy that knows why we're producing these forages is primarily for livestock feed, but just thinking like a biologist would think about it, okay? I just would cringe seeing an animal running through a drought-stricken pasture, okay? Because those plants are doing their darndest to try to hang on and survive. Cows are doing their darndest trying to hang on and survive too, okay? Most of these plants are not there for the animal, okay? They're there for the plant. Which is why we see prickly pear cactus that nobody wants to eat. How long are the thorns on those Scots thistles? And how many pairs of gloves you gotta wear to keep from bleeding to death? Okay? A lot of these plants that are able to survive and tolerate these drought conditions, you know, they got thorns and they got stuff on them that'll hurt you, you know, if you fool with them. Okay? So, you know, they've got some mechanisms there that will allow them to survive. Most of the things that you said, I've got these broken down by legumes, warm seasons, and then our cool season perennials and cool season annuals. One of the things that you'll note are on the cool seasons that most of the critical stubble heights tend to be a little bit taller, okay? Because that growth during the cooler season is gonna take a little bit longer than it will during the warm season for the summer grasses if you've got some good growing conditions, okay? Well, right now, how tall is the wheat? I hadn't seen any that tall yet. Okay, have I? We might have saw one pasture, might have been 4 inches today. Wasn't one with the horses on it. Okay, I don't think this didn't look like it was gonna have any livestock on it either. Okay, so what do you do during a drought? Well, you know, okay, let's ignore what Redfearn says, and let's maybe cut these in half. Is that okay? I would say that's probably okay. Okay, you're gonna have to start somewhere, because the reason that we're trying to manage these things is for livestock, okay? So we've got to do something to give the plants a chance to succeed, and that one thing's gonna be stubble height. Okay. Talked a little bit about, even when precipitation returns to normal, the effects of this drought are not going to immediately disappear. Okay? That's along the same line of thinking as this first comment, is that during a drought and the management that occurred last year is what's going to dictate forage and pasture growth this year. And then the year before, and neither one of those years were very good, were they? You know, you look back, boy, that high precipitation that we had the past 20 years. The other thing we've learned is precipitation is way better fertilizer than nitrogen. Okay, the best fertilizer ever is that rain. You know, we learned how much a dadgum cow can eat, and they can eat a lot. What else did we learn? We learned some of these plants are pretty darn tolerant of drought, pretty darn tolerant of grazing during drought, but they're not perfect. okay? So we've got some things we can work with, but if these pastures were overgrazed and beat up the past 2 years, even if they get a chance to green up early this year, because that's gonna be related to temperature, that carbohydrate level in it is not going to allow them a lot of early, you know, a real big, great flush of growth, okay? They're gonna green up, hang out with some green leaves and try to produce some energy to put down in that root system, okay? So the absolute worst thing that could happen to them this year is to be grazed early again if they were grazed early last year. Okay? Because they'll thin back up. You know, we'll have to, Ron will have another question about controlling weeds in those things that nobody thinks about, because there's not any book around on what to do for management during the drought. We'll be pretty darn smart when it starts raining again, I think.
Darren, one thing on native range in my country that was I mean, you talk about early spring green up. I don't think any of our native ranges really tried to green up too early, but we had the cool seasons, you know, downy brome mainly, and man, it just came in there.
I'd hammer the fire with that stuff. Well, that's the other thing about the natives. The natives are a lot smarter than they introduce grasses. You know, they, you know, have developed under, you know, that back to that 600 year 12, you know, whatever, you know, they were kind of cooking along in there, and they understand a little bit, I think, about what the environmental conditions are. And if it's dry, you know, they're not gonna do it just because of Bermuda. You know, Bermuda grass is waiting on temperature.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it doesn't care about water, it doesn't care about fertilizer. You know, if it gets the right temperature, now it's gonna say, you know, hey, it's time to go to town. You know, the natives, I think, are gonna be a little bit more predictable in their window, but the bromes are another thing that we saw last year, and they just popped up like, you know. But, you know, there again, if you've got those in some natives, boy, I'd be almost inclined to go out there and just use those boogers up.
Yeah, the problem is you need 4 times the stocking rate
Yeah.
for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
That's the problem a lot of our guys have seen is
Yeah. But you know, so there, if you've got those, you know, stick them out there, you know, put them out to graze, watch that. That's all this is gonna be, watching the graze. You know, can't be going by on the calendar anymore about July 4th and May 15th and that kind of stuff. You know, we're gonna have to watch what these grasses are doing. But I think if you get those annual bromes, we'll get them again this year.
Yeah,
Okay.
they're waiting.
Yeah.
This rain will do them all.
And the first 2 or 3 warm days you get, you know, they're going to explode. But I would go ahead on those and use those till this native stuff started to green up, and then get them back off of there. You know, and give those natives a chance to try to get some growth on them. You know, because then what happens is you know, it's kind of, when do you want to feed your cow kind of thing is kind of what we're up against. You know, if you're tired of feeding them now, you want to graze it early, you know, eventually you're going to have to feed them again at the end, you know, before the end of the summer anyway. You know, so, you know, kind of think based on, you know, and we talked about this a little bit coming down. You know, if you buy what Dr. Bidwell says, about 75% of what's going to happen is happening by July 1. You'd be just about as well off just to let whatever's gonna happen and use them the second half of the summer. Because they'll typically go dormant to a drought anyway. You know, if it's dry, you know, if it's not, then you're that much further ahead. But I think, I'd sit down and think about that a little bit. But, you know, there again, from a plant standpoint, I think that's what makes the best sense to me. You know, but then you've got to think about everything else from the animal management standpoint. But just from a plant standpoint, that's what makes the most sense to me. If most of it's going to happen by July 1, just let that happen, and then you kind of know what you're dealing with. Also, from a yield standpoint. So, you know, it's not easy. You know, The other thing that you see during the drought is that usually, and we'll see this with the introduced that are not fertilized, not taken care of. You also see it during the drought is the yield of those introduced grasses, then the yield migrates closer to the yields of the natives. Okay, so normally what you see when you talk about carrying capacity, you'll be able to carry twice as many animals more or less on the same number of acres of introduced that you will on native if you fertilize it, take care of the weeds and all that. But what happens during a drought is it's not responsive to those inputs, so the yields become more similar. The carrying capacity then becomes more similar. So you're not able to have twice as many animals on your burrito grass during the drought. And so when we talk about critical stubble height, the three reasons that's important for root growth, it's important for water nutrient uptake, and then this big one, it's important for energy reserves for sustained plant growth. And then I've got time to show this one, okay? This will kind of maybe, think about this one a little bit. I think Aaron saw this in class. Do you remember seeing this in class? This is your test, your final exam. You don't remember that? Was that the day you were reading the paper?
Probably so.
Okay. So, if you look at the kind of the influence of excessive prolonged forage removal, this is during drought or not. This is going to be especially true during these drought conditions. You've got a couple of different responses. You've got a plant response and you've got a soil response. Okay? Both of them start here with less top growth. If you've got less top growth, you're gonna have less leaf area, you're gonna have less energy capture, energy available for plant growth. That's also going to mean less root growth, less plant vigor, okay? So during the drought, when these plants are continuously grazed short, they're always gonna be short because they don't stand a chance to make any energy, okay? Now on the other side over here, you got less top growth. All you kind of guys in the, these no-till guys will understand this a little bit. And so when you talk about less top growth, you're gonna have less soil cover. What does that mean in a cropland system? Gonna have less water infiltration, gonna have less soil water, gonna have less top growth. So what you got, you just got this plant cycle and you got this soil cycle. Bad things going on both directions. And so at some point, it's gonna be important to allow these plants a chance to accumulate growth, if nothing else, to improve infiltration. Which to me makes a lot of sense during the drought because we wanna be able to capture whatever we can. We sure want it to go in and instead of off. Now notice back in, I got 4 or 5 minutes here to preach. You guys remember back in 2 years ago when it was so hot and dry during the summer, once it started raining, the dadgum ground was so hard. You know how many it took? A good bit of rain to get it softened up enough for the water to even go in. You guys remember that? I thought it never was gonna soften up enough to go in.
There's some places that haven't softened up yet.
Yeah. And that's true. So then you get the question, so then what about, so we're getting some questions now, Jason Warren is, about soil compaction. Is the soil compacted? No, it's not compacted, it's just hard as a rock. But it's just the top, 2 or 3 inches is what we're talking about, okay? And so once you get a little bit of rain, now, now here again, I'll tell you what he says, okay? He says that once it starts raining, that soil is gonna be more mellow than it was before the drought. So, it'll be improved. But, the point is that at some point, we've got to allow these plants a chance to accumulate some top growth so that we can improve the vigor of the plant and then also so that we can improve some of the water relations in the soil. And so that's all I've got for my, I think that's right, isn't it? Am I right on time?
Any more questions for him?
You mentioned on the Senate program about, if you've got lots of pastures, you should try and maybe just,
throw one away or let one suffer and close all the gates, like in our situation
Yeah.
where we try to survive, you're opening up the gates and letting them have everything, and you talk about.
Yeah, well, okay, so you get into this drought, we talk about grazing management, the tendency then, when you get short of forage, and my father-in-law does this, irritates me to no end, wears me slick, okay? It's just open, I got all the gates open, I said, why? Well, you know, I said, go out and try to catch one of them. You know, you can't manage them when they're going everywhere, okay? And so I said, well, are you feeding them? Well, yeah, I'm still feeding them. I said, okay. So you wind up with short of forage, you're feeding them anyway, but your grass is starting to green up a little bit. So, and it goes against, you know, conventional thinking is, okay, close all the gates, get them hemmed up out on your worst dadgum pasture if you're gonna feed them, okay? Feed them out there on your sorriest pasture, beat that thing up, let everything else get a chance to recover. And so then if you have to go back in and reestablish or replant, you're only working on one pasture, and it's your worst pasture anyway, which probably needs the most help. Okay? The sacrifice area concept. You know, and so as we get some of this early spring green up, you know, just because the grass is green doesn't necessarily mean it's time to begin grazing. So if we continue to feed them in this because it's, and then you think about the long-term drought, even if we have early spring green up, is that going to eliminate feeding longer than we normally would like to do? No, it's not. We're gonna have to feed them again. So then you've got one area that you bring them back to. Okay, and do all your feeding right there. The other thing that happens is they're getting all the food put, you know, so the nutrients are being increased in there, and you're getting some residue from the hay that's been, you know, so there's a lot of things that are positive about that from that standpoint. Now then I'll get the question on the other side, well, the only water I've got's in my best pasture. You know, same thing, okay? You know, what's gonna be water's a big time limiting factor, okay? That's the other thing we learned, how much a cow can drink out of a pond going dry. You know, they drink a lot of water. Somebody asked me that the other day, they didn't believe the answer. I said, I bet a cow can drink 55 gallons of water during the summer. Oh, they won't drink that much. I said, yeah, they will too. So, you know, if water is the limiting factor and that happens to be in your best pasture, put them in your best pasture, let those others get a chance to do whatever they're gonna do, and just realize that your best pasture is gonna be beat up a little bit, okay? So there's gonna, you know, decisions are gonna have to be made. What if you got no water? You know, there's a guy, you know, hauling water and feed. Oh my, you know, I do that about 3 days. You know, that seemed like a lot of work to me.
I'm not into feeding water.
You know,
That's what my husband told me.
I barely feed water myself, y'all can tell.
We've done it, stocking rate suggestions.
Suggestions?
Can I defer that to Dave Walton? Sure. Dave, are you ready for that question? We got a panel discussion coming up with these two guys on it this afternoon, and we'll hear what they both have to say about it. And the short answer, whatever you guys say they can do, cut it by half and then half again, you're probably about right.
Maybe zero.
Yeah, from the planting guy in me says 0 is the right answer, you know, but I know that's not gonna happen. It's
The
very good.
economist in me says they still gotta make a land.
Yeah, you know.
All right, we're gonna take a short break.